It is time for another episode of the Cultural Hall and welcoming in Matthew Webster. Thank you for being here, sir.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Now, Matthew's episode comes to us by great fortune from our friend Portia. Now, you probably have listened recently and thought, "Hey, didn't that other guest that we have in wasn't that recommended by Portia?" Yes, it was. I love her. I love her for sending great guest recommendations. She just reaches out to me on social media, but you can send me an email, contact@theculturalhall.com. We have all types of conversations around anything in and around the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And here's the deal. If you are just coming to this for the first time, stay a bit. I would tell you that, it takes maybe a little getting used to. We talk about any and everything, and I think that you'll really appreciate that that's the approach that we do. But, if you're listening for a minute and you go, what is this? Push through, keep listening, and I promise that you'll either become a lifer or a convert to the Cultural Hall. Matthew, this is what Portia told me about you, as some fodder maybe for us to be able to talk about.
Okay, let's
Uh,
go.
you went to a nude beach, she lets me know, so I'm excited to talk to you about that. She said that you underwent a lot of weight loss, and so I'm interested to sort of talk to you about that. She says that you are a cool guy, so I'm excited to get to know that, but certainly feeling those vibes as well. You were married and ended up divorced. We'll probably get into that a little bit. And then also she lets me know that you are a gay active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I'm excited to talk about that as well. Matthew, and all of those things I queued up, where would you like to go first?
Oh, goodness. We can maybe let's talk about the nude beach first, because I think it
Yes.
ties into everything.
All right. Take me to that nude beach. Not literally. We both have to stay here in Utah, but figuratively, take me to that nude beach.
Well, I'm not going to lie. We would love to be in Hawaii right now.
Yes.
So the whole reason for the nude beach is kind of random and funny because after my divorce, I was married to a man. I decided I was going to appreciate myself and learn about God. So, how do I learn about God on a nude beach? That makes no sense. Well, I went to Hawaii solo, camping, driving around, sleeping on beaches, showering at the beaches. And one day when I was there, I was saying a prayer and I said, God, this is 8 months after my divorce. I said, God, I need something to do today. I had no plans. And a friend texted me that was on the island as well and said, let's go dive with sharks. We had planned it, everything was going to work out, and then
I,
it got too windy.
And I just want to throw something in here real quick, because I think that there's a certain amount that rings true for people who have been divorced before, and when you're in that first year and someone texts you and says, "Let's go dive with sharks," and you're like, "Listen, after I made it through that, I'll do whatever. It doesn't matter. Let's just go."
Amen. Seriously. And
Yeah.
that's what this trip was. This
Mhm.
trip was I'm going to jump out of an airplane. I'm going to do all the crazy things
Mhm.
because why not?
Yeah.
So there's too much wind. And I'm all of a sudden Googling which beaches to go to. And I have this voice in my head that says, go to Polo Beach. Now, I had not known what Polo Beach was. I look it up. It's about 15-minute drive from where I was.
Mhm.
Drove over to it. It's a nude beach.
Now tell
Okay,
me
cool.
real quick, which island are you on? Not that I want to know where Polo Beach is, but
Oahu.
okay, okay.
So I get there, and now I used to be over 450 pounds. And so I used to be extremely uncomfortable in my body. And I get there and I'm like, I'm going to just enjoy my time here. I'm going to find a spot where I could just relax, enjoy the waves. Was not very many people there. And so I found a spot where there's actually a log that goes over into the ocean. And I sat on there just with my headphones in, listening to music. And most random thing happens. Some guy is walking along the beach toward me, and then he goes into the water and he was hobbling. So it's kind of odd. And he makes his way over to me and he leans up against this kind of log that I'm on.
Mhm.
And I have my headphones in and I'm dancing and I'm just enjoying my time. And he starts talking to me, which I couldn't hear what he was saying.
Mhm.
So I take my headphones out and he's like, "How are you doing? How's your day going?" And we just started having a conversation. And I noticed he had a lot of tattoos. So I started asking him about his tattoos. And he says to me, I don't really talk about this much, but this cross here is for my relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, at this point, I had not gone back to even any religious organization,
Mhm.
nonetheless, the Church of Jesus
Mhm.
Christ of Latter-day Saints. But we started talking. He said, "Are you gay?" And I told him, "Yeah, I am. I am a homosexual man." And he laughed and he's like, "Yeah, I've never talked to any other gay man about Jesus before."
Hmm.
And I said, "Well, that's awesome that right now I randomly got inspired to show up here. You have hobbled your way down to this part of the beach." And he had actually sprained his ankle playing football the day before.
Hmm.
So to him, it didn't make sense why he would go to the beach. And we had this 3 hour long conversation
Wow.
about faith and about growing and development and not just kind of pigeonholing ourselves into a category. And that moment somewhat shifted my whole perspective on the way God sees me and the way God can use me and use my experiences and my light. And it's what ultimately kind of led me back to going to church, is just that moment at that beach of, hey, I had connected with someone who was in pain, both physical and emotional pain. And he had put a tattoo on his body to represent his relationship with the Savior. Similarly, I did. After my divorce, I got a lion tattoo, a big lion on my arm.
Mhm.
And it was fascinating that just that alone, that moment, opened my eyes up to see how much God is aware and Jesus Christ is aware of who we are, where we need to be, and why we need to be there. Because to me, going to a nude beach made no sense. I would rather be diving in the water with sharks. And yet, that wasn't where I was meant to be. I was meant to be in that moment at that time. And it was fascinating to have that 3 hour long conversation and just really connect with somebody that themselves had a lot of emotional scars they weren't working through because they didn't feel they had the right to talk about Jesus Christ.
Mhm.
And right after, this is even what caps off the story. My favorite part is after that, I went to a park about 15 minutes on North Shore away, and there were two missionaries, elders,
Mhm.
sitting at this park. And I walked by them and I said, "Elders, how are you guys doing today?" And they kind of looked at me like, "Who is this guy? He looks like he's probably homeless. What's this guy want with us?"
Mhm.
And I asked them their names, asked them where they're from. I said, I'm a member," which is the first time I had actually said I'm a member of the church for a long time.
Mhm.
And they asked about my tattoo, and I said, "It's funny. I got this tattoo to be symbolic of Christ, just like those name tags you wear." And one of the elders said, "You probably would reach more people on this island with that tattoo than our name tags do." And they didn't know that I had just had this experience at this nude beach, but it was just one of those moments to cap it off and say, He is so aware of us, even in our pain and our struggle and our strife and all the storms of our life. He is so aware of us. All we have to do is follow Him,
Mhm.
and He will lead us to the places that don't make sense, but He will give us the experiences that do make sense.
Matthew, someone listening to that story could just say, "Oh, but it was coincidental. You happen to have you happen to be at that beach, and that guy maybe he's told everyone about his tattoo, and he just told you he hadn't told anyone. And then, it's North Shore, Oahu. That's where the Polynesian Cultural Center and BYU Hawaii, and there's tons of members of the church there. This is all just a big coincidence. How do you know that it's actually God and not a coincidence?"
How do I know that?
Mhm.
Because of what this gentleman shared with me. He's not a
Mhm.
member of my faith. He doesn't have the same exact beliefs as I have. He was a member of the military, and he grew up in a single family home. He's a black guy from Florida, and he had no reason to feel inspired to be at that beach either.
Mhm.
He had just sprained his ankle. Every moment of that interaction said, there's no coincidence because I wanted to be shark diving, and clearly he didn't want to be at the beach. But something got him to go from the army base to the beach. Something got me to go away from my plans and be there. I don't believe in coincidence.
Yeah.
I believe that everything has the opportunity to be inspired if we are open to the inspiration.
Well, and it's interesting because I think we limit inspiration. If you headline this story as God wanted me to go to a nude beach to renew my faith, I think that there would be some people that kind of go, wait, there's something about that I don't know, but that is in fact how God was able to speak to you and be able to lead you and touch into your life and be able to guide you. So how do we navigate those things where we put limits on God? How can we stop doing that?
It's interesting that you ask it that way because I had a conversation with a group last night for church. This
Mhm.
goes kind of into what I do now within the church. I facilitate a spiritual and emotional support group. And we focus obviously on come follow me lessons
Mhm.
and Jesus Christ. And last night, that was the big question is how am I supposed to read these miracles? We talked about the miracles that Christ performed and apply them to my life. And it's like, well, we need to look at it from the perspective of if we limit God to what we think and to
Mhm.
what we know, then we're actually limiting ourselves to what is possible because every single person who was healed by Christ during his ministry, both physically and spiritually, came to him in different ways.
Mhm.
Some were having to be lifted and put down through a home. Some had to just reach out and touch a garment. Some couldn't see him and were brought to him. And so if we expect to only go to Jesus Christ in one straight line and one way, then we are going to expect failure. Because as Christ even told the Pharisees, the old ways are done. There's no checklist to come to me. The purpose is to come to me. However, you get here, whatever storm you're going through, you focus on me and I will be there. I will be there to not just calm the storm, I will be there to show you a way to follow me forward. And so it's a challenge for a lot of people because we do want to limit or we look towards other people's faith to tell us how to come to Christ.
Mhm.
And we're just limiting what Christ can do for us because there's not a member of the church, in my experience, who has lived my life. There's not a member of any religious organization or any faith or any, you know, spiritual system that has lived my life. But there is one who has experienced everything I have. And so if I am to, even within the church, turn to my bishop and say, hey, give me exact steps to get to Jesus Christ, that bishop, if he's honest, will say, just like mine did, I don't have all the answers. I need you to go and pray. I need you to go and do the things because there's no one who can tell you exactly how to resolve your past, what repentance exactly looks like. And if they try to tell you there is, then unfortunately they're doing exactly what Christ told the Pharisees. They're keeping out the people from the temples. They're keeping out the people from the places of worship, from the studies, from the knowledge. And so for me, if I only imagine Christ as what other people tell me he is and how to get there, or what my past is, then I'm limited. And I'm only limited to where I have my brain capacity to at that point, or what someone else's brain capacity is. And sometimes we get so stuck on being right
Mhm.
that we don't let Christ be right.
Mm.
And even last night, I'll just real quick share this part, and then we can kind of go forward. But last night we were talking about the story. Christ shares a parable, casting the seeds right onto the ground,
Mhm.
and some hit the stone, some hit the thorns, some hit the actual nourishing ground. And I said, well, who am I? Am I the stone? Am I the thorny ground? Or am I the nourishment? Do I want to be that ground that produces good fruit? And in reality, that's what we want to be. And that's different for everybody. So I can't be hardened. I can't be stiff where someone or God or an experience is there for me and say, there's nothing to learn here, and let that moment of faith potentially die off. Or I can't be the thorny grounds where a moment of faith happens, an experience happens, and I love it and I start to grow. And then the thorns, my past, my sins, people's perceptions of me start to just stop my growth. I need to be that nourishing ground. And that means getting rid of all of my thoughts that are from the past
Mm-hmm.
and not hanging on to those, getting rid of my past addictions, getting rid of past behaviors and patterns, because clearly my way led me to a divorce and complete darkness. So I don't want to choose my way.
Yeah. Turn it over to God. Quick question. The tattoo being a lion, I don't know that I've ever heard Christ compared to as a lion. So I would love to know the connection in that.
Yeah, so you've got the Lion of Judea and the Lamb of
Okay.
God, right?
Okay.
And I'm actually going to get the word lamb in Hebrew put on that same arm, and it's supposed to be symbolic of both sides of Christ. There's the lamb, the sacrifice, and the Lion of Judea that returns to claim what is his kingdom.
I love it.
And so I find that so fascinating, just that combination of he's everything. He's
Yeah.
the compassion and he's the force. He's the power.
Yeah. I would also ask you, and sort of on a lighter note, uh, the experience with the nude beach, it's never what you want it to be. When you go to a nude beach, it is always the people that you're like, man, this is in my mind, I had this nude beach going very differently. I just think that is if God leads you to a nude beach, sure, do it. But otherwise, anything that you expect from that nude beach, know that it's not going to be how your mind envisions it, and just find a different beach. I just want to make sure that
I think that's a fair assessment. I think that's
I
a fair assessment. In fact, when I went there, I intentionally chose like the furthest spot
right.
that I thought no one would even come to and see me.
Hmm.
And so when I got there and I saw this dude walking toward me and going then from the sand into the water, I'm like, why is he even bothering? I'm like way out of the way. I
Right.
don't want to see anybody else.
Yep.
My intention was not to be seen by anybody else, but it is what it is.
Yeah, just a little word to the wise, kind of an aside there. So I want to know, you've mentioned it, and it has stuck out to me a couple of times as you've said it, talking about your past. And so you mentioned, and as was mentioned by Portia as well, that you are a gay gentleman. I would love to know how you, maybe not necessarily came out, but how and when you were like, oh, this is part of who I am.
Yeah, that's something I realized at an early age. I was in elementary school when I first even have the idea that potentially I wasn't feeling the same way as some of the other boys in my school
Hmm.
toward the girls. Um, I didn't enjoy the teasing as much, like that weird, phase that we all go through,
Yeah.
or apparently I didn't go through.
Yeah.
Um, and then finally, around the age of 12, is when I had a term for what I was experiencing. And when I had the term, I'll tell you, this is one of the worst things about technology is that you can look something up online.
Oof. Oof.
Because I had a term and then I can look it up online, and all of a sudden you type in something to a search engine
Hmm.
that just puts, gay man, and especially back then, it was images and terrible, destructive thoughts. And that is unfortunately, this is why I'm out and I'm very open about being gay, is because if we don't talk about this, those are the resources people turn to.
Right.
And they're unhealthy and they're unwise and they're unproductive. And I know what it did to my life. I know what it did to my self-worth, my self-esteem, my image. It was just awful. But I knew at a young age that I was perceiving myself as different.
Uh-huh.
And then I got a term for it. And I ended up coming out. It's funny, my coming out story is probably, different than some people expect, is that I would always pray to God and I'd say, hey, I want to come out when my parents are ready. when my
Uh-huh.
family's ready to receive that. So
Interesting.
I'm just going to wait for you to tell me when they're ready,
Hmm.
which it did happen. It happened, at age 24. I was driving home from work and I got this message in my head, like I always do when I have this type of inspiration, like I did for the nude beach. It was, hey, it's okay to call your parents and tell them you want to talk to them.
Yeah.
And you don't need to tell them what about.
Yeah.
And they, man, I got to tell you, my parents are pretty awesome. My dad, as soon as I told him, he got up from the couch, and some people would think he's getting up to be angry, and he gave me a hug, and he said,
So you talked to them on the phone and then linked up with them and said, "Hey, I'm coming over," or something like that. Is that
"Yeah." I talked to him on the phone and said, "Hey, can we set up a time to just me
cool?
come over and
Okay.
talk to you?" I'm
Okay.
sure in their head they're thinking, "Oh shoot, he's got some disease he's going to tell us about, some
Yeah.
cancer or
Yeah.
whatever." And so I tell him I'm gay, and I had it planned out. I had a date that night, so just in case it went bad, I can go on the date and focus something else. Anyway, Dad stands up and gives me a big hug, and he says, "I love you." And he says, "It makes sense why you were wearing some of the stuff you wear." And I just chuckled. And my mom had, she broke down and started crying, and we had a good conversation. And she said, "I'm not upset about who you are. I'm just afraid that people are going to treat you poorly."
Oh.
And I said to her, "Mom, I'm the youngest of 8. I've got 6 older brothers. I have been called everything in the book. I have been beat up. I have been built to handle what anyone says to me."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Plus, I've got you as my mom, and you're able to defend me if you need to."
Mm.
So it was a coming out story. I think, unfortunately, a lot of members of the church or just gay people in general don't get to experience, and that's just beautiful love without condition. And I'm thankful for that because I've relied on that unconditional love over and over and over.
I want to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to pick this story up right where we're at. We'll come back and do that in the second block of the Cultural Hall. Here in the second block of the Cultural Hall, remember you can become a Patreon saint. Go to patreon.com/the Cultural Hall, where for as little as $5, you can put your money where your ears are. Show costs money to put out, costs money to do, and it costs my time, which is worth money for crying out loud. So why don't you support us financially? It's patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. And remember, all the Patreon saints get to be a part of that secret but not sacred Facebook group where we're all hanging out, talking about the different tangential things that come up in each of the episodes. I'm certain that we'll have a discussion about nude beaches in that group after this episode. Now, Matthew, I'm curious. 12 years old, that puts us what year? I just want context for kind of
So I was born in 87.
okay, so
So that was
99,
99.
99. And so that's sort of the just early internets.
Yeah.
And you go there and you search what term? What term did you search? You said you had a term for it finally. What was
Yeah.
the
I just searched just gay man,
okay. And then it
right?
brought up all of those things. Now, I have to ask because of where the church was at that sort of turn of the millennia and early 21st century. You know, the church is all in on Prop 8 in California in your most formative years, 20, 21, 22, recognizing how you are, how you feel, and how, the church feels and how those are not quite the same. How did you navigate that time in your life?
It's interesting as I look back on that kind of period of my life
Hmm.
because I had been essentially rejected for serving a mission and
Now wait.
found,
So you rejected for serving mission, like you tried to serve and they wouldn't let you? Is that what you mean?
yeah. So I put in mission papers
Okay.
and they told me essentially, no, you're just at that point. Again, I was 450 pounds at some point in my
Oh,
life,
okay.
right?
Uh-huh.
And so this was kind of not devastating, but devastating news
Sure.
as I'm like, well, I'm battling this. I'm not even battling it. I know I'm gay and I love Jesus Christ. And the church I'm trying to serve is telling me no.
Right.
And so Prop 8 and what was going on there was probably the least of my concerns.
Okay.
Because to me, it was like, man, I just got to reconcile who I am. And I went through, some just pretty hard times emotionally and mentally. absolutely nothing to do with Prop 8, but just navigating the waters of, if I'm not, and again, this goes back to that checklist that we talked about earlier.
Sure.
If I'm not going on this checklist, if I haven't done these things, how am I supposed to know God? And that was a very, it was a very hard time for a few years where you get rejected from serving a mission, and culturally, especially, this, right? And at that time, you didn't want to tell anyone that,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, I have friends who returned home from missions early because of injuries or sickness, and they were embarrassed for returning home.
Sure.
So to me, Prop 8 was just a matter of, look, this is somewhat humorous to me that we're going to debate whether or not people have the right to just simply be married,
Hmm. Hmm.
when in fact we have so many personal individual issues that Christ can heal and develop. And I was going through a crisis of my own.
Hmm.
So I'm actually thankful in a way for that crisis, because I didn't get wrapped up into an ideology of either I have to be so strong for the church or I have to be so strong against the church. I was just in a crisis of my own.
Hmm.
And I'm thankful that I was, because I know that ended up causing a lot of division for families, and even within the church, it caused a lot of division. So I'm actually grateful for the crisis I was in.
Sure.
It kept me
Maybe,
away from all that craziness.
yeah, a little bit of a blessing of ignorance, right? And maybe that's a weird way of
Yeah.
saying that, but just being like, listen, you got some other things. Let's worry about the other thing. I wonder, how were you able to kind of push against that feeling that I think is supernatural, to be like, fine, God, if you don't want me, I don't want you, when, being rejected from a mission. I had a similar, though not exact experience. I wanted to be an EFY counselor, which I recognize as sort of a sub portion of the church. But when I went to do it, I had facial hair, and I think I got discounted completely because I had a goatee. And I'm just like, well, wait a minute. I'm not defined by, I'm no more defined by my goatee as you're defined by your weight at that time, right? If God loves me and I need a chance to build my faith, why am I not allowed this chance to build my faith? And made me super angry.
Here's it's hard. You're right. It's hard because I grew up in this church, and
Mm-hmm.
I grew up being told, hey, you just have to do these things and then we'll send you on a mission. And then I
Right.
had people in my direct setting, my life, who, some people who were similar weight to me, had gotten mission calls.
Mm.
And maybe they had a better connection to the church. Their dads, served or worked at BYU as professors, or I knew people who were, having sex before their mission and they still
Right.
served a mission. And
Sure.
so there was definitely a lot of questions, but I didn't blame God, um, because I looked at it as God appoints people to make decisions, and those people sometimes make decisions out of arrogance, out of ignorance, and sometimes they make a decision that's probably best.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean I didn't feel upset. That didn't
Sure.
mean that I wasn't tormented inside somewhat. In fact, I some of my best friends returned home from missions. My brother Josh, who's just a year and a half old, not even a year and a half, 15 months older than me, returned home from his mission. And it was hard watching all these people return home when I wasn't able to have that same experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of did have a time period, in 2009 to 2000, roughly 11, where I just stopped going to church, really.
Mm-hmm.
I disconnected. Um, Unfortunately, and I say this, and I know this is a hard topic to talk about, but I even tried to take my life at one point,
Mm.
and it had nothing to do with being gay, which some people think, man, being gay is when a lot of people try to take their life, trying to reconcile that with God. Mine was just, I don't think I'm going to be able to fit in anywhere.
Mm.
And so even that experience, I was out cold for 3 days in an apartment room that no one even knew.
Um,
And when I woke up, I was actually mad at God. That's when I think I was mad. I was like, I tried to just stop all of this, and you, for some reason, couldn't even want me there. Um, and then, of course, I had I call it like a reckoning, where
mhm.
God's like, you're an idiot. Like, stop being stupid and stubborn. I'm keeping you here and
Mhm.
alive.
Mhm.
And that's when it hit me. I don't think I would have been a successful missionary at that time
Mm.
because I would have been battling internal demons still of identity of Christ. And so my focus probably wouldn't have been serving Jesus Christ. My focus probably would have been trying to figure out my own faith.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful that I didn't go on a mission. I'm grateful, and it sounds bad maybe to some people, but I'm grateful that I woke up from a suicide attempt and God was like, "You're just an idiot. It's okay.
Mhm.
It's okay to be an idiot because there's a better way." So, and again, I went back to church. I went back to church at that point, and it was amazing to go back to church and be single in a singles ward.
People will talk about that they have to reach that sort of rock bottom moment. And I've heard it from various people, that struggle with addictions, that when they didn't have anywhere else to go and found themselves homeless, that was sort of their rock bottom. People that have struggled either with suicidal ideation or the actual acting on it, and finding that when they had made that attempt and were not successful, that was sort of their rock bottom moment that gave them a different perspective or was able to change everything for them. I would imagine, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, that this was your rock bottom moment.
To that point,
Mhm.
I
But
think
wait,
rock
there's
bottom is
more.
fascinating. There always is.
Yeah.
I even talked about this last night with our spiritual emotional support group. It's following Christ doesn't mean that you're not going to experience darkness.
Mhm.
It just means sometimes you're going to experience darkness so that you can become lighter, so that you can be brighter.
Mhm.
So that wasn't, I actually, it was a suicide attempt, but I still don't even think that was my lowest I got. Lowest I got was after my marriage.
Okay, let's go there.
Yeah. What do you want to ask?
Well, I mean, so you get married, and it has the weight loss taken place, because I want to make sure and talk about that piece a little bit. Did the weight loss take place before the marriage or after, or give me some context as far as that goes?
Okay, so here's where it gets interesting, right? So I went back to church
Hmm.
after the suicide attempt in 2013, March 11th, 2013.
Hmm.
I was diagnosed with kidney failure.
Okay.
A doctor made a mistake. I had kidney failure.
Oh,
I ended up spending 21 months on dialysis.
oh my
Uh,
gosh.
look, it was a nightmare. God bless my parents' home teacher, which I know is not a term we use anymore, but at the time we had home teachers.
Uh-huh.
He gave me a kidney. Uh, After 21 months, I was on dialysis. He gave me a transplant, and I had already successfully lost weight, but with kidney failure and all of a sudden the transplant and being put on medications, I gained all my weight back.
Mm.
And so my kidney doctor said, "Look, there's only one option for you, and that is let's have a gastric sleeve because that is going to reset everything. You're going to lose weight, and if you use this as a tool, you will be successful." So 2015, I had a weight loss surgery in October. In December 2015, that's when I met my now ex-husband.
Hmm.
And so he met me at a phase where I was still pretty big. I still had a lot of weight to lose. And so it's bizarre the way our mind works, but I had never felt anyone in my life thought I was attractive.
Mm.
And so for the first time in my life, I was openly gay. I was dating. I was losing weight. I was healthy. I was what I believed emotionally, mentally stable. I was in school getting a bachelor's degree in sociology. And then I met somebody amazing. And I still think this person that I was married to, though it ended horribly, has great core, beautiful soul, beautiful spirit. And I met this person, they saw me for who I could be.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh my goodness. And I was going to church at the time. And so it was kind of a conflict in a way too, of like, I'm going to church, but I just met this guy who finds me attractive.
Hmm.
And it's not even based on sexuality. It's not even based on a physical intimacy. We just connected.
Mm-hmm.
And so that whole journey was fascinating too, because meeting him and dating, and then we went to church together. He's not LDS. He's not even from this country. He's from Haiti. Um, we would go to his Baptist church together, and we would go to our church together, my LDS church together.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fascinating. It was like, this is good. This is good. I'm combining all of my worlds, and it's making sense. Um, in my head, it was making sense.
Mm-hmm.
Behind the scenes, there were other things going on that I unfortunately wasn't aware of.
Sure.
But until a year into our marriage, and that, kind of set a poor tone for the, next several years of my life.
Yeah. How, to hear that you are active in the LDS church at the time, and then make the selection to be married to another
Yeah.
man. There are some people who would argue, listen, there's not a place for you in the church, or they take their sort of reaction like, it's clear by what they say and what they teach that they don't want you, Matthew. Why do you want to be a part of a place that doesn't want you? I hear that a lot. What say you to that?
You know what? That's a question I still get, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though when I was dating and then married, we would go to church, people would ask that. And now that I've gone back, people still ask that. My answer hasn't changed. And that is, I don't necessarily care about, and this could come across wrong to many people. I don't necessarily care about the structure or the organization. I care about Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And I care about the people at church who, just like me, need him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not going to fight and bicker and go over back and forth and have a battle with someone over a specific doctrinal point, because I don't know where the doctrinal point was inspired from
Mm-hmm.
necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
And also, as we've seen, there's an evolution to the way our church, and not just our church, throughout the history of the world, religion and spirituality takes place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all because we have to have an open mind. If I just limit my mind to saying, hey, they don't want you there, then I'm not going to have the cool spiritual experiences and then meet the cool people I've now met in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I look at it from the perspective of, I go back to church, especially when I was married and dating. When I would go to church, it was not to be disruptive.
Mm-hmm.
It was not to cause chaos. It was to connect with my fellow sinners in and for Jesus Christ.
Mm.
And it had nothing to do with who's right and who's wrong. It had nothing to do with what actions someone should or shouldn't have in their life. It just had to do with the fact that there's probably nowhere in the world than a church building, whether it's LDS church or a Baptist church or a Protestant church, that there's a concentration of sinners that are so consciously aware of their sins than church buildings.
Yeah.
Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so why would I not want to go there? That's where they are. Why wouldn't I want to be with my fellow sinners? Because that's where they are. And they want to do it in recognition of the Savior. So that's how I view church. That's why it doesn't bother me that I have different life experiences, because it shows me so much more about others. If they are willing to, through their trauma, through their crisis, still willing to go to church, then God bless them. Come be with us.
How do you, so when I hear stories of addiction, and I guess for all intents and purposes there was some element of food addiction. Let me not
Yeah.
place that on you, but I would imagine that soothing with food and taking it that way, and then also the loneliness and disparity around your attempt at suicide. How have you learned to love yourself?
That's a cool question. It's evolved a lot, because so here's another part of the story, right? Is when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, I was being sexually abused.
Mm.
Um, Not by someone in my family. It was by a friend's father and two teenage boys. And the words that were said to me that you'll never be loved. You're not lovable.
Ugh.
Um, it stuck with me. And so when I was a kid, my mind had the seed planted of you're not lovable. Okay, so then if I'm not lovable, what does that look like?
Mhm.
And so, of course, you look in the public sphere, and magazines show skinny, fit, beautiful, these strong people. So I developed, and now I can recognize this at this stage of my life, I developed habits to become unlovable,
Mm.
perceiving myself as unlovable. So I physically grew that way. I became somewhat hard on the outside, somewhat combative with some people. And yet other people saw me as compassionate. It was amazing as I look back at my life and I even talk to people that I randomly see from my past, and they're like, Matt, you've completely changed. I don't even recognize who you are anymore.
Mhm.
Um, and they don't even know that sexual, abuse part. And so the evolution of self-love for me, it took place after my divorce because I thought self-love when I had my weight loss surgery after kidney failure was, man, I love my body now.
Mhm.
Look at me. I'm fit. I look great.
Mhm.
Um, I'm married. We look good together, right?
Mhm.
That's what
Mhm.
self-love was to me during that phase. And I ignored, again, this goes back to toxic marriage. I ignored a lot of things that were going on in my own marriage because I loved myself.
Yeah.
And then when I got my divorce, that was my lowest point. That was the darkest and the lowest I'd ever been. And I questioned myself. I was like, Matt, you've lost weight. You met somebody you loved. You sacrificed for that person. We traveled the country together playing pickleball professionally. I helped him,
Wow.
launch his pickleball career professionally. And we were kind of well known together, right? And
Mhm.
I sat there in that moment and I just realized I never loved myself. I never loved me. What I envisioned love to be was always external. It was always validating from the outside. Um, and so I never loved myself. And then all of a sudden, going through that divorce, that's why I got the tattoo. That's why I jumped out of an airplane. That's why I was willing to try everything
Mhm.
because I didn't care what it was to find out what it felt like to feel good for myself.
Yeah.
I was going to do it as long as it was healthy, positive, and productive. So I got rid of drinking alcohol. I got rid of hanging around people who were toxic, who only had disparaging things to say about others, who
Mhm.
were constantly rumoring. And I realized like self love has nothing to do with validation from anyone else. It comes and it stays from within. And it's just a powerful force once you have it because there's no one, even now, as people question me going back to church, people question me in my decisions, in my career, in what I'm working on my side projects. People question me all the time. And I just think, cool. That doesn't bother me. I
Yeah.
love exactly where I'm at and what I'm doing and who is guiding me to be there. And so self love is ultimately, to me, is doing what's healthy, positive, and productive in alignment with God. And all of those other times in my life where I thought I was experiencing self love, none of that was really actual self love. It was relying on something external to make me feel good. And nothing ever did it. Nothing ever did it.
Powerful words. Let's take a break. We'll come back in the third block of the Cultural Hall. Here in the third block of the Cultural Hall, make your listening of the Cultural Hall active, whether that means you're making a review wherever you can review this show, you are telling someone or multiple someones about it, whether it be this episode or another. Don't just listen and keep it to yourself, you selfish jerk. Share it with somebody else, for crying out loud. And you can always, just share a link on social media if you want to do it that way. Maybe you don't know who this episode could particularly touch, and you can headline it as God told me to go to a nude beach. That is clickbait if ever there was. Share the show, help grow the audience. Matthew.
Oh, that's good.
Let me ask you, you've sort of hinted at this a couple times. Is it a class that's on online on the side? What is this spiritual enlightenment, come follow me? What is this thing that you're talking about?
So this is a ward, my singles ward, right? I'm over 30, and hopefully I don't look like it.
No, you don't.
But
I wouldn't have said a day over 22.
great, perfect. I
I'm also a
appreciate that.
liar most of the time. I just want you to.
Oh man. No, so this is a group that is for my ward,
hmm
and I think we actually have some fellow, brothers and sisters from other areas come
hmm
occasionally, and it's honestly just people who are struggling with different things. And when I got that calling, and it was because the bishop at the time, he found out I was getting my master's in psychology, and
Okay.
so he's like, "I think I have a great calling for you," and I loved it. Honestly, it's a group of, like I say, people who are struggling to understand the gospel, to understand their life, to overcome addiction, to kind of connect and socially develop relationships. So it's a beautiful group. I actually hope and pray that there's more of these groups out there, because I know what it's done for me and I know what it does for others.
So to clarify, it's not an addiction recovery program that the church has done.
No.
This is just like a what, a weekly study group with members of your ward, is that?
Yeah, kind of. And sometimes we're not even actually getting into come follow me. We're
Okay.
just we have to have some conversations that maybe it starts with a come follow me question,
Sure.
and then it turns into a, hey, actually, there's someone going through something, so let's have a conversation about that.
And
You
is
know,
it anything people sort of self-qualify themselves to be able to attend this thing, open invitation, that kind of thing?
yeah, open invitation. There's definitely some people, I'm sure the bishop has specifically said, hey, here's a group that you
Uh-huh.
might want to go to. Just check it out. Thursday nights,
Yeah.
and it's beautiful because we do get a variety of people who are either coming back to the church, who've been active their whole life, some who maybe not are struggling completely, and some who were at that like we say, that lowest point, that darkness.
hmm
Um, so I love the fact that I can be there and just be connected to such beautiful people.
Can I ask you a sort of snarky question?
Of course.
Don't you think this is what church should be when we go on Sunday? That it should be this thing where people who have questions and are struggling and feel comfortable and find community? Like, isn't that maybe what we're missing a little bit in just our regular worship service?
100% agree.
Yeah.
I mean, it's what we're missing. We're missing the reason, right? We're missing the real reason why we're there, and that is to be healed.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that this ward specifically has that group. I would love it if it was like, hey, Sundays, let's be honest, let's be open. We're all struggling, and I got to
Yeah.
say, my ward, Richie, my ward is pretty awesome. We have people who are very vulnerable and honest from the pulpit when they give talks. I've
hmm
got, my old bishop and this new one. Um, Man, they are so willing to have conversations that are awkward, and they're so willing to say, especially I'm in the single adult phase, so clearly everyone at this point either has gone through divorce
hmm
and knows the disappointments, never been married, seeking that out, lost a spouse
hmm
to either to suicide, to natural death, whatever it is. So this is a group of people that is definitely relying on the atonement of Christ, and so we are willing to have sometimes uncomfortable and awkward conversation, which I know doesn't happen maybe in traditional LDS meetings on Sundays, because you got families that are, let's not offend people. Um, my opinion is, let's offend people.
Yeah.
let's do it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that you're not offending for offensive sake. I think that you
No.
that when we engage in these conversations, I think that there's two parts, and I tend to think that it is the second part is where we get tripped up. We all often are encouraged to be vulnerable, right? And oftentimes that comes with sharing things like, when I was divorced, I felt like a failure, like I had not done, God led me towards this thing, or whatever the thing may be. That's my own personal experience. I felt some element of that. So I think that there's that. And then I think the second piece, or the other side of that, is that we have to be willing to admit that this conversation may be awkward. And by that, I mean, your response to me, my vulnerability could be, well, why didn't you just get over it? You didn't need her anyway. Your life is better without her, or whatever, right? And be able to go, oh, hey, let's have a conversation about how I have interpreted your response to what I just shared, and let's talk around that. And I think we do, or are doing, a better job about the first part, which is being able to be authentic, being able to be vulnerable and share ourselves. But we really got a long way to work with. Yeah, okay. That's how you felt, and I had a bad reaction to that initially, but I want to be better. I'd like to listen. I'd like to learn more, instead of being then offended and pushing ourselves right back out.
Yeah. And you know what's cool is, Rich, my other calling with
Mhm.
church is elders quorum instructor. And that's a space where, when I got the calling, I told the bishop at the time, look, I am not going to be traditional.
Mhm.
I am going to admit right now in your office, when we're having this conversation, and the elders quorum president talks to me, I said, look, I don't know everything. I don't know the
Mhm.
doctrine completely.
Mhm.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the lesson, and I'm going to ask a lot of questions, and I'm going to draw out a lot of pain, and we're going to have conversations that are uncomfortable. And that's where elders quorum is going to be. And it was funny. The elders quorum president at the time and the bishop agreed. It was like, cool, that's what we need.
Mhm.
That's what we need. And I have had people tell me, I gave a talk in church last November. I thought it was a good talk overall, a lot of good
Mhm.
feedback. But I had one gentleman come up to me. He's in my elders quorum. He said, man, your talk was offensive. I was so offended by several things you said. And my response to him was, well, isn't that great? You can be offended by my life. You can choose to be offended by my life. And yet I could be offended by what you just told me right here. That I was
Mhm.
so vulnerable, I shared things, and you're offended. I said, but I'm not going to be offended, because I think it's great that we can have this conversation.
Mm.
And now I talk to that guy pretty regularly. And so I think the more people are willing, I'm willing to step up and be a target sometimes of someone to say, I'm offended by you. You shouldn't have done that.
Mhm.
Because you know what? Again, I love myself well enough, and I know my Savior well enough to know that if someone tells me I'm wrong, well, if I've gone to the Lord and I've given my sincere heart over, then that's going to be their feeling. It's not his feeling.
Yeah.
Because that same talk, I had another guy come up to me, and he said, um, he sat at the very back row with his girlfriend, and he said, "Man, I got to tell you, I have never really talked to a gay person in my life.
Mm.
I grew up in the Midwest, and I grew up where we weren't talking about you, we weren't talking to you, you just didn't exist." And he said, and I was in tears. I get a little emotional, but he said, I was in tears during your talk. And he said, and I've never felt so small in my life.
Mm.
And so I think we have to risk being offensive and vulnerable and honest. And it's not easy. I will tell you, Richie, there's so many people in my life who, when I share things, they're like, man, that I wouldn't share that. And I think you're right. You probably wouldn't.
Mhm.
And I understand, because there were times in my life where I wouldn't share things. I didn't share with my family what was going on in my marriage, right?
Mhm.
There's things that we're embarrassed of, we're ashamed of, we have guilt over, that we're unwilling to share because we are afraid of judgment from others. I don't, I don't know if you allow swearing on the show, but I was going to say, I don't give a damn about judgment of others,
You can say
right?
damn all you want. I'd say it.
Yeah, I just don't.
Uh-huh.
I don't care if someone else has the reason to judge me, because ultimately I know who died for me,
Yeah.
and I know where my judgment comes from. And so if someone wants to judge me for my past or my vulnerability, or tell me they're offended, by all means do it. But I don't pass judgment on them, because I have learned that God sees me exactly who I am, and he sees who I can become. And Christ has laid out that foundation in that way. So I don't mind being vulnerable and honest and saying really uncomfortable things in spaces where people are like, "Ah, maybe this is a little too sacred of a space to say that." And I think that's what Christ did. I think he went into the temples, and he flat out, he flipped tables. He
Mhm.
challenged people. He told the Pharisees, when they questioned him on taxes, he said, "Why don't you pull out a coin and show me what you're talking about. And then they have to break their own law and show a symbol from man, a gold coin in the temple. And Christ was saying, look, you're hypocrites. And I think that's okay to do. I think it's okay for me to be vulnerable and say really uncomfortable things sometimes at church, because the people who need it, which is all of us, the sinners, they connect with Christ. They really do.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting as you were saying that, kind of walking that out a little bit. You know, Christ was able to do, say, and be how he was because he knew who he was. And I think that that can be extended when we know who we really are. We can act, say, be, and do the things that we know we need to. And I think that that's a real powerful place to come from. We
Yeah,
have,
yeah.
oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Matthew, we have 3 questions we ask everyone who steps into the cultural hall, and the time has come for me to ask those of you. The first one you've sort of answered, but because I want the official title of the calling, do you have a calling? And if so, now, what is it?
So I've got 2 callings. So elders quorum kind of instructor, and then I've got a emotional spiritual support group facilitator.
Okay. If you could pick a calling for yourself, either one that exists or make one up, what would you pick?
Oh goodness. Would it be it would be a good calling to just go around and to every single temple in the world and take photos.
Yeah.
Is that a calling? I'll do it.
I think there's a gentleman. I'm not sure if he's done it now with the, President Nelson and the 300 temples, but a gentleman that we interviewed in an episode in the past. His name was Scott Jarvie, who he had at least done all of the ones in the United States at the time, and maybe overseas. But yeah, I love that mission call. Travel the world, see the temples.
Yeah.
The last question we ask everyone, we ask you to interpret it however you would like, but the question remains: what is your favorite part of your faith?
Oh, my favorite part of my faith is letting it grow. Is knowing that faith is always going to expand, and so that's my favorite part.
Yeah.
Is that I don't know everything, and quite frankly, I probably only know 0.001% of everything. And so my favorite part of faith is the expansion.
Yeah. Well, Matthew, I hope that this episode has nourished and strengthened your body, that if you're not healthy enough to listen this week, that you'll be healthy enough to listen next week, and that when the time comes, you will be able to travel home in safety. In the meantime, we'll be saving a seat for you on the back row of the Cultural Hall.